Dangerous, not because they attack, but because they withdraw. The fed-up empath. You know what most people don't realize? The most powerful move an empath can make isn't fighting back, isn't screaming, isn't matching energy for energy. It's something far more unsettling for those who've been feeding off their compassion. It's the quiet decision to simply stop participating in the game entirely. Today, we're diving into something that might make you uncomfortable, but it needs to be said. We're talking about what happens when someone who's given everything finally decides they've had enough, and why that moment, that exact moment, is more terrifying to a manipulator than any confrontation could ever be. This isn't about revenge. This isn't about getting even. This is about understanding a psychological dynamic that Dale Carnegie himself would recognize, the shift that happens when someone moves from reactive compassion to strategic self-preservation. Carnegie understood human nature better than almost anyone, and he knew that sometimes the most powerful communication is the absence of communication. So stick with me for the next 20 minutes because we're going to break down exactly why a withdrawn empath represents the ultimate game changer in toxic dynamics, and more importantly, how to execute this shift with the kind of calm precision that actually works. Let me start with something Carnegie would absolutely agree with. Clarity trumps everything. When we talk about dangerous empaths, we're not talking about people who've turned cruel or vindictive. We're talking about people who've achieved something far more powerful, absolute clarity about their own worth and boundaries. Carnegie spent his entire career teaching people how to influence others through understanding and connection. But he also understood something crucial. Influence only works when both parties are operating in good faith. When someone is consistently taking advantage of your goodwill, continuing to engage isn't noble, it's enabling. The fed-up empath represents something that goes beyond Carnegie's traditional framework of win-win scenarios. This is about recognizing when win-win isn't possible because the other person is only interested in win-lose, with them winning and you losing every single time. Carnegie would call this emotional intelligence, the ability to read a situation accurately and respond appropriately. And sometimes, the most appropriate response is no response at all. But here's what makes this so powerful. It's not done in anger. It's not done for dramatic effect. It's done from a place of such clear understanding that explanation becomes unnecessary. The empath has finally recognized that their energy is finite, their compassion has limits, and their time has value. This connects directly to Carnegie's principle about the importance of making others feel important. But what happens when you realize that someone has been using your need to make them feel important as a weapon against you? The fed-up empath stops playing that game entirely. Now, let's talk about what I call the saturation point. This is the moment when an empath finally realizes that the emotional cost of continuing to engage outweighs any potential benefit of maintaining the relationship. Think about it like a bank account. For months, maybe years, the empath has been making deposits, emotional availability, understanding, second chances, benefit of the doubt, explanations for bad behavior, excuses for broken promises. They've been depositing their energy, their time, their emotional reserves into this relationship. But the other person, they've been making withdrawals, constant withdrawals. They withdraw attention when they're not getting their way. They withdraw affection as punishment. They withdraw respect as a control mechanism. They withdraw honesty because truth doesn't serve their agenda. At the saturation point, the empath looks at their emotional bank account and realizes it's overdrawn. Not just empty, actively in the negative. They're operating at an emotional deficit, and every interaction just deepens the debt. This is where the real danger begins for the manipulator, because the empath starts doing math, cold, clear math. They start calculating whether this person adds value to their life or subtracts from it. They start measuring the energy they put in against the genuine care they receive back. And here's the terrifying part for someone who's been taking advantage. The numbers don't lie. The empath realizes they've been funding someone else's emotional stability while bankrupting their own. They've been providing consistency to someone who offers them chaos. They've been offering unconditional positive regard to someone who gives them conditional scraps of attention. At the saturation point, something fundamental shifts. The empath stops trying to fix the other person. They stop trying to understand the other person. They stop trying to help the other person see their perspective. They realize that none of that was ever really their job to begin with. This isn't about becoming heartless. It's about becoming strategic with their heart. It's about recognizing that their compassion is a resource. And like any resource, it needs to be allocated wisely. Carnegie himself understood this principle. He knew that effective people don't spread themselves thin trying to please everyone. They focus their energy where it can make the greatest positive impact. The saturated empath has simply applied this wisdom to their personal relationships. They've recognized that pouring energy into someone who consistently disrespects it isn't noble. It's wasteful. Here's where it gets really interesting. The game changer isn't what the empath does. It's what they stop doing. They stop providing what I call the 3 pillars of narcissistic supply: attention, access, and explanations. First, attention. The fed-up empath stops giving their mental and emotional energy to drama, crisis, and manufactured urgency. They stop responding to every text immediately. They stop dropping everything when summoned. They stop allowing their emotional state to be dictated by someone else's mood. This is devastating to someone who's used to being the center of someone else's universe. Suddenly, they're not. The empath has other priorities, other interests, other people who deserve their energy more. Second, access. The empath starts controlling when and how they can be reached. They stop being available for last-minute demands. They stop accepting calls at all hours. They stop allowing their boundaries to be trampled in the name of the other person's convenience. This is where you might see panic from the other person, because they've lost their guaranteed audience. The empath is no longer a sure thing, no longer a reliable source of validation and emotional regulation. Third, and this is the most powerful one, explanations. The fed-up empath stops justifying their decisions, defending their choices, or explaining their reasoning to someone who's proven they don't respect it anyway. This is absolutely crucial. The empath realizes that explanation implies negotiation, and they're no longer willing to negotiate their basic dignity and peace of mind. When someone asks why they can't just drop everything and come over, the old empath would have provided a detailed explanation, probably apologetic, definitely over-explaining. The fed-up empath simply says they're not available and leaves it at that. This drives manipulative people absolutely crazy, because they can't argue with a boundary they can't access. They can't wear down someone who won't engage in the wearing down process. The beauty of this approach is that it requires no aggression, no confrontation, no dramatic scenes. It's just quiet, consistent unavailability for behavior that doesn't serve the empath's well-being. Carnegie would appreciate this because it's psychologically sound. It's not reactive, it's responsive. It's not emotional, it's strategic. It's not about punishing the other person. It's about protecting yourself. Now let's talk about execution, because this is where most people struggle. How do you actually implement this withdrawal without creating more drama than you're trying to avoid? The answer is what I call calm tactics. These are strategies that allow you to maintain your boundaries without giving the other person ammunition to use against you. First, polite grey rocking. This means becoming as uninteresting as possible in your interactions. You respond to direct questions with brief, factual answers. You don't volunteer additional information. You don't ask follow-up questions. You're polite, but completely unremarkable. If they ask how your day was, you say it was fine. If they share drama, you say that sounds difficult and change the subject. You don't take the bait. You don't feed the fire. You don't provide the emotional reaction they're fishing for. This is incredibly effective because it gives them nothing to work with. They can't accuse you of being mean because you're being polite. They can't say you're ignoring them because you are responding, but you're responding in a way that provides zero emotional fuel for their fire. Second, written decisions. When you need to communicate a boundary or decision, do it in writing when possible. Text, email, whatever works for your situation. This serves multiple purposes. Written communication forces you to think before you respond. It prevents you from getting pulled into circular arguments. It creates a record of what was actually said, and it allows you to craft your message when you're in a calm state rather than reacting in the heat of the moment. Your written communications should be brief, clear, and final. Not cold, but definitely not warm enough to encourage further negotiation. Third, non-negotiable deadlines. When you set a boundary, attach a timeline to it, not as a threat, but as information. If you need an answer about weekend plans, you need it by Wednesday. If someone needs to pick up their belongings, they have until Sunday. This prevents the endless back and forth that keeps you emotionally engaged. It puts the responsibility for action on them, not on you to keep following up and managing the situation. The key with all of these tactics is consistency. You can't grey rock on Tuesday and then have a 2-hour heart-to-heart on Thursday. You can't set a deadline and then extend it when they push back. Consistency is what makes these boundaries real instead of just suggestions. Carnegie understood that respect comes from consistency. People learn to take you seriously when your words match your actions every single time. Here's what you need to understand. When you start implementing these changes, the other person's behavior is going to get worse before it gets better. This is called an extinction burst, and it's completely predictable. Think about it like a broken vending machine. If you put in money and nothing comes out, what do? You try again. Maybe you hit the buttons harder. Maybe you shake the machine. You escalate your efforts to get the result you're used to getting. The same thing happens when you stop providing the emotional supply someone is accustomed to receiving from you. They're going to try harder to get your attention and emotional energy. First, they'll likely try charm. Suddenly, they'll be unusually nice, complimentary, maybe even apologetic. They might acknowledge past mistakes or promise to do better. This is the equivalent of putting in exact change and pressing the buttons gently. Don't fall for it. This isn't genuine change. It's strategic adaptation. They're trying to figure out what combination of behaviors will restore their access to your emotional energy. When charm doesn't work, expect anger. They might accuse you of being cold, unfair, or difficult. They might try to make you feel guilty for having boundaries. They might escalate their demands or become more aggressive in their attempts to get a reaction. This is the machine shaking phase. They're frustrated that their usual tactics aren't working, so they're applying more pressure. The key here is to stay centered. Their anger is information about them, not about you. It's confirmation that you're doing something that challenges their control, which means you're moving in the right direction. After anger comes bargaining. They might offer compromises, make promises, or try to negotiate your boundaries. They might bring up past good times or future possibilities. They might suggest that you're overreacting or that things aren't that bad. This is the most dangerous phase because it can feel like progress. But remember, you're not trying to fix the relationship. You're protecting yourself from further damage. True change doesn't come with bargaining and negotiation. True change is demonstrated through consistent action over time without you having to monitor and manage it. Throughout all of these phases, your job is to remain calm and consistent. Don't defend your boundaries. Don't explain them repeatedly. And don't negotiate them away. Carnegie would call this emotional self-control, and it's one of the most valuable skills you can develop. Your ability to remain centered while someone else is spiraling is your superpower. Now let's talk about the practical side of this. Your clean exit plan. Because sometimes withdrawal isn't enough. Sometimes you need to create physical and logistical distance as well. This requires preparation. You need to think through the practical aspects of reducing contact or ending the relationship entirely. This isn't about being dramatic or making threats. It's about having a clear plan for your own protection and peace of mind. First, logistics. If you live together, work together, or share responsibilities, you need to figure out how to handle those practical connections. This might mean finding alternative living arrangements, requesting schedule changes, or dividing shared responsibilities. The key is to handle this as professionally as possible. Don't make it about them or their behavior. Make it about your need for space or change in circumstances. Second, witnesses and support. Make sure trusted friends or family members know what you're dealing with. This isn't about creating drama or recruiting allies. It's about having support and accountability. Having witnesses serves multiple purposes. It gives you people to talk through your decisions with. It provides accountability when you're tempted to slip back into old patterns. And it creates a record of your experience in case you need it later. Third, alternative routes. This sounds dramatic, but it's practical. If you work in the same building, know the back entrances. If you frequent the same social spaces, have alternatives ready. If you share friend groups, think about which events you might skip. This isn't about living in fear. It's about removing opportunities for unwanted interaction while you're establishing your new boundaries. The goal is to make it as easy as possible for you to maintain your boundaries and as difficult as possible for them to violate those boundaries. Carnegie understood that environment shapes behavior. By controlling your environment, you're setting yourself up for success. Remember, a clean exit plan isn't always about cutting contact entirely. Sometimes it's about creating enough space for you to maintain your emotional equilibrium while still handling necessary interactions. The key is that you're making these decisions from a place of strength and clarity, not from a place of fear or reaction. Let me bring this all together for you. The fed-up empath is dangerous not because they've become cruel or vindictive, but because they've become unavailable for manipulation. They've withdrawn the very thing that made the manipulation possible, their unlimited emotional availability. This represents a fundamental shift in power dynamics. The person who was used to controlling through emotional manipulation suddenly has no leverage. The empath is no longer trying to win their approval, manage their emotions, or explain their own worth. Carnegie would recognize this as the ultimate form of self-respect. It's not about being right or getting revenge. It's about valuing yourself enough to remove yourself from situations that consistently diminish you. The truly dangerous part, from a manipulator's perspective, is that this withdrawal often becomes permanent. Unlike anger, which can be weathered, or arguments, which can be won, withdrawal represents a complete change in the relationship dynamic. The empath has essentially said, "I no longer find this interaction valuable enough to continue investing my energy in it." And unlike other forms of conflict, there's no way to argue with someone who simply isn't present for the argument. This is why prevention is so important for manipulative people. Once someone reaches the saturation point and begins strategic withdrawal, it's almost impossible to restore the previous dynamic. The fed-up empath has learned something crucial. Their energy is not renewable in the context of a relationship that consistently drains it. They've recognized that some people will take as much as you're willing to give, and the only way to prevent emotional bankruptcy is to stop making deposits. Next week, we're going to dive into something equally important: rebuilding a healthy network after you've stepped away from toxic dynamics. Because withdrawal is only half the equation. The other half is creating connections that actually nourish you instead of depleting you. We'll talk about how to recognize healthy relationship patterns, how to trust your instincts after they've been undermined, and how to build connections based on mutual respect rather than emotional rescue. But for now, I want you to think about your own situation. What boundary could you calmly but consistently apply? What form of supply might you need to withdraw? What would strategic unavailability look like in your specific circumstances? Write your thoughts in the comments below. Share what resonated with you, what boundary you're considering, and suggest topics you'd like me to cover next week. And if this made sense to you, if it gave you clarity or validation, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear this message. Remember, the most powerful word you can learn to use is no. And sometimes, the most powerful way to say no is simply to become unavailable for the things that don't serve your highest good. Your energy matters, your peace matters, your emotional well-being matters, and protecting those things isn't selfish, it's essential.